I think, brilliant. I already see some of you starting to introduce yourself on the chat. Please feel to do so throughout the duration of this webinar, so we know who is in the audience, your disciplinary background, and any interests you're having. First of all, I'd like to welcome you all to the first ECR seminar series of the Violence and Mental Health Network. My name is Leonie Tanczer. I'm a lecturer at University College London, and I'm one of the grant holders of the network. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the network, it's a UKRI funded research network that is set together by a very interdisciplinary group of researchers from the mental health sector, from the domestic abuse, criminology sector, history, up to technology. And the aspiration of the Mental Health Network is basically that we want to study the prevalence, but also how we can better address mental health problems derived from violence and abuse in children and adults, but also in the elderly. If you're interested in learning more about the network, I will post the link in a couple of seconds onto the chat so you can find out more about our network, and perhaps also join us on our website and our newsletter. And with that, I'd first like to introduce the wonderful panel that we have lined up today. I'm very excited and I'm very keen to learn more. I would like to introduce them in the order of their speaking order. First, we have Stephen Kahn here, who is executive editor of The Conversation for the UK branch. Before joining The Conversation in 2013, he was actually a news editor for The Guardian. So he is, and also for The Independent. So he has a lot of experience in working with kind of traditional print media, but also with the outlet of The Conversation that he will be talking about today. Next, we have Shiroma Silva, who is a senior producer, director, and journalist who makes a lot of films for outlets such as the BBC. She has a lot of experience in kind of the visual area of media, in talking on television, on radio, and she has a lot of experience also working with academics who she always draws upon for her productions, such as most recently on future technologies. Next, we have Mark Brown. Mark was an editor of the mental health magazine 1 in 4, and now he's blogging onto the new mentalhealth.org. Mark has been shortlisted for the Mind Champion of the Year award in 2010 and is probably one of the most outspoken people on Twitter and all the social media platforms when it comes to mental health issues. So he hopefully will talk a lot about like how academics and especially early career scholars can engage and use social media platforms. We then have Freya Robb, who is press officer of the UK Science Media Centre. She has a lot of experience helping academics to excel with independent press offices. She's focusing a lot on UK mainstream media, like broadcast, print, but online. And she's worked a lot on issues around climate change, but also dementia, antidepressants, etc. And last, but absolutely not least, we have Christy Walker. Kirsty is director of UCL Media Relations. She's a former journalist and has dozens of experience. Her CV is quite impressive. She worked for a very long time as correspondent based in Westminster for the Daily Mail. She's also worked with former British prime ministers and has been commentator for the BBC, ITV, and many other outlets. And she will also speaking about like how academics can really use media branches in universities to really excel when it comes to media relations. Now that I have introduced the panel for today, I'd like to briefly outline how it will work. We will have 5-minute short overviews from and input statements from all our speakers who will give an introduction of the organizations or the platforms that they represent, and then also give 3 core snappy messages that they want to share with the audience when it comes to media engagement, as especially early career researchers. And after that, we will hopefully have some form of introduction and discussion from you. So please make use of the chat function that I will closely monitor. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Stephen.
Thanks, Leonie, and thanks everyone else. It's really a privilege to be here and to be invited into your homes at lunchtime to speak a little bit about communicating your expertise, but also a little bit about what we at The Conversation do. I think I wouldn't mind starting just by saying, you know, I've been involved in this project for almost a decade now, and sort of each year that goes past, it kind of feels even more imperative that people like you share your experience, your knowledge with people like me and the broader population who don't have that kind of specialist academic research-based knowledge. And why I say that might not come as a surprise. And frankly, you just have to look at the news in the last couple of days. I watched a little video clip last night of an unfortunate family with one individual suffering from COVID symptoms quite desperately, but then engaging with a medic in an argument about whether or not COVID was real at all. And the medic eventually sort of walking off because it was just a sort of untenable discussion. And that's quite an extreme example of misinformation and a sort of complete failure to engage with reality. At the other end of the spectrum, though, you have real and quite valid debates, often between aspects of science or academia, around the validity of certain messages or arguments. And I guess a topical one at the moment would be the dosage regimen for inoculations in the UK and whether that's being rolled out correctly. Perfectly valid voices from across the realm of science on whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. And I guess your specialist knowledge just seems crucial to that debate, because take that out of the debate and what are you left with? You're left with a vacuum and often quite poisonous and ill-informed voices with certain agendas will find their way into that vacuum. So I just think it's imperative that people like you share your knowledge with people like me and the general population more widely. I think you've got so much to offer, and that there's never been a moment quite like the one that we're in right now for your knowledge to really sort of make its value known and aid and empower society more widely. And I think that there's a whole bunch of ways in which you can do that, and some of them have been mentioned earlier. You know, the Science Media Centre being an obvious one. But I think the conversation, for its part, over the decade, has played a significant part in giving you the opportunity to directly take that knowledge to what is now a massive global audience. You know, we reach more than 50 million people a month globally. About half of those come direct to conversation articles on the website, and then half again reach conversation content through our republication network. And I'm hard pressed to think of a global publication that does not use conversation content, either directly republishing that, which is how we count that 50 million figure, but then also outlets are using our content to source news stories. So I think prolific users of that would be the New York Times, the Times of London, but also the BBC, and then outlets like the Today programme, which will use academic voices subsequent to those voices appearing on the conversation. So I would say that is one way I would encourage you to absolutely engage directly with the public. But I wouldn't say it's the only way. And the conversation exists as a charity to encourage this sort of engagement. So I would strongly you to use whichever platforms you feel comfortable with. And also, if there's one message I would leave you with, I would say focus in on your specialist knowledge. So I'm sure you have views on many aspects of of research, some of which are probably quite close to where you operate. But I think I think all of you have fascinating stories to tell and insight to shed. And you know, I've had people come up to me at training sessions and say, "Oh, you won't be interested at all in the area that I focus on. It's the mathematics of knots, or it's, you know, the structure of train lines." And yet, you know, we have found news events for these people to engage with, and to engage with quite spectacularly. And usually that's just about timing and just about casting that knowledge in the right way and projecting it to a big audience. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Stephen. If there's any further questions, you know, to Stephen about the conversation, you know, we have the Q&A function, so please feel free to use that, and we can pick that up later on. Next, I'd like to invite Shiroma Silva to give us her input statement. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Oh, great. Hi. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Leonie. Thank you, Stephen, as well. It was great to hear what you had to say. And I'd echo a lot of that, of course. So I work across the broadcasters mostly, although I started off in tabloid newspapers. And now most of the work I do is for the BBC and such like, in the news and features areas. I think, following on from what Stephen's saying, it's absolutely true that, you know, however niche something might seem, there's often a place for it, or will be a matter of timing and positioning, and getting this across well. So I think the main points I would say in terms of the media generally is to bear in mind, of course, obvious thing to say, but I mean, it's a busy place. You know, lots of people are vying for its attention all around the world. And so for the things that you do, which is, you know, significant and interesting, it's possible to get it across in a nuanced way, as long as it's pitched so that it appears to be relevant and captures the imagination of the audiences that the outlets are aimed at. So from my experience of liaising with academics, which I do pretty regularly, the one thing I would say that could be worked on is, say, for instance, the way that something's presented. Language can often be very flowery, for instance, and sentences can be convoluted. So it can be hard to ascertain what the main points are that are actually being raised for the listener or the reader. So, you know, basic rule of thumb, which I'm sure you've heard before, but keep it simple, keep it clear, and in, say, a radio interview or a TV interview, self-contained sentences, often self-contained answers can often help, because simple ideas that can be easily edited help to make it to the end, as it were. And also try to keep it linear so that you don't go off on tangents as one would perhaps in a normal conversation. And I think examples are great. I mean, if you can illustrate what you say with either real life examples or even visual examples, that always helps to enliven subjects. And, you know, if something is considered academic or even inaccessible, examples are a great way to bring that to a bigger audience. So, you know, bearing those in mind and giving it to the producer concerned before or during the interview will help to get points across. I would say that even though things have to be simple or relatively straightforward, it's always important to respect the intelligence of the audience and respect the intelligence of, obviously, the journalists and so on, because I think most people can grasp a lot if it's explained well and if it's explained in context. That said, the audience, of course, is going to vary a lot. A Newsnight audience is always told context, whereas maybe the audience for a newspaper, tabloid newspaper, may not be in the same way. So you need to know who you're talking to, as it were. Then just practical things about, you know, coming across. I would say having a pleasant disposition always helps, always a good way to get people to listen. But don't try to be funny if you're not, as it were, because that can backfire. And I think these principles apply to whether it's a news story or whether it's a documentary, but the two may work in two very different time schedules. So obviously news stories, fast turnaround, and answers and interviews are done within hours. Documentaries, it can be days or even weeks. But the general principles apply. And I think it's important to keep what you're saying relevant to the world, but you can pitch it so that it does become relevant, as it were, or time it so that what you have, which is vital to how we operate, because in a way it's what we feed off, just pitch it correctly and at the right time. And I think there are people who will always be interested to hear what you have to say. And with that in mind, always ask, sort of, why would people outside my immediate circle be interested, and why would they be interested now? So if you can bear those ideas in mind, it's really quite possible to get openings into the media and get yourself heard, as it were. I think it's also possible to tie whatever research you're doing into broader events, into what's happening in the world generally. And if you can find an inlet like that, well, there you go. That's certainly very helpful. Now, just in terms of contacts, personal contacts always work very well. I mean, that's very often the way it operates. So people get found through other people, as it were, recommendations and so on. So, obviously, if you do a media appearance and it goes well, then it's very likely that you'll be remembered and think, oh, well, this person was good on this. Maybe they can help us with something else, or know somebody who can. But I think it's also, just on a practical level, a good idea to make yourself known to organizations and databases that may have some crossover with the work that you're doing and specializing in, charities and so on. So, and also your own media departments, so that, when a story breaks on sort of early Sunday morning, say about a horrific domestic abuse case, for instance, and the press department of your university gets a call saying, can we have a specialist in this area? They have your number, and then you might get that call from a journalist reaching out to you and wanting some academia to back up some of the case studies that are manifesting. So I think
Brilliant.
I've had my time.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Shiroma. And again, the prompt for everyone, if you have specific questions, please post them into the chat. I've already marked some of them to answer later in the Q&A, and we will also try to answer those that are really quick and easy in a written format. So check out the Q&A session there as well. I'd now like to hand over to Mark Brown, please.
Hello. Hello, everyone at home. Lovely to see you, or not see you. I can't see you, you can see me. That's the wonder of social media. I do mental health stuff. I'm Mark 114 on Twitter, which is probably where you might know me if you know me from anywhere. So the first thing to consider when attempting to use social media as an early career researcher is why. If you're already a social media user, which you probably are, how will being an early career researcher on social media differ for you? You already have a challenge. Research is the long process of finding things out and testing hypotheses. Most people don't want research. What they want is either facts, answers, or advice. What you will be providing in nearly all situations is none of those things. As an early career researcher, you have access to a few things that members of the general public don't have. You have access to a body of existing knowledge within your field. You know research, and you know what debates are current. It's very easy to overestimate how many people have both an academic library ticket and an Athens login. You have, by definition, privileged access to what is already known. How you represent knowledge in the current state of understanding in your field is down to you. You have a choice. Always remember, most of the general public cannot access your papers unless they're open access. Always remember that what is a boring key text for your field isn't likely to be in the local library. It's a lot better to be consistent, productive, helpful, and trustworthy than it is to act the goat for clout. There's a constant conflict for most researchers between wanting to communicate research to the public and wishing to maintain a walled and cloistered garden where they're only speaking to other academics and specialists. If you choose to take that public path, then you'll face legitimate scrutiny. Academics can screw up like anyone else can. You'll also face illegitimate scrutiny and, depending on the implications of your work, absolute hatred. We know the internet hates anyone who isn't a white bloke. Under the pressure of unfiltered response, it can be difficult to tell the difference between abuse, legitimate questioning, pointless whataboutery, and attempts at support. Sometimes it's because the field you work in is controversial in itself. Sometimes it's because the findings of your research, which you're prepared to stand by, which you know are valuable, seem conflicted or uncomfortable. Sometimes it's having the wrong coloured skin or being the wrong gender or sexuality at the wrong time. Sometimes the most damaging attacks you'll face on social media will dress up an illegitimate attack as a legitimate question. It'd be disingenuous to claim that all it takes to build an online profile is to be honest, consistent, responsible, and truthful. Social media clout comes from many places, a lot of them very unpleasant. The objective, I think, is not to have the most followers, but to have the right ones. You can only achieve that by working hard at being useful, sensible, human, and approachable. Of course, there are celeb academics. Many of them get to be so because they are particularly good at expressing their knowledge in ways that work for people who might then go on to seek them out for other work in the media, or who hold a niche that's held only by a few people. There are also celebrity academics who are absolute scumbags who betray not only the discipline they work in, but the people to whom the results of their discipline apply. Cheap controversy builds interaction most quickly. Don't be one of those people. With anything in social media, think, in 6 months' time, will I be able to explain the way I acted today? There's no easy path to public profile if you have a commitment to truth and integrity and to kindness. You don't have to be the centre of attention to make the world a better place. Reaching a broad audience takes talent in areas not traditional for a researcher, in areas outside of your field. Turning 2 years of research into a slide deck is one thing. Turning it into content that someone with little prior knowledge but lots of interest will want to watch instead of a much, much more dangerous video on the same subject is another skill entirely. Master your topic so you feel as comfortable within it as if you were wearing it like an old jumper. Unlearn your academic writing tics and look at how people write for a broader audience. Don't fall for the siren call of TED Talk structures. TED Talks and debates are just boxing matches for people who weren't good at fighting at school and talent shows for people too embarrassed to do karaoke. Clarity, kindness, purpose, and consistency, and most of all, taking responsibility for your work and the implications of your work will stand you in good stead. I'm sorry if I haven't revealed any practical secrets to doing social media and to having social media success, because I don't really think there are any. Beyond following one single golden rule, regardless of the platform or the medium you choose. And that rule is actually, don't be a dick. You've got a choice about it, and don't be one. And that's me.
Thank you so much, Mark. A very honest and I think very revealing comment from your that hopefully encourages also some conversation. Certainly resulted in some comments. Perfect. Thank you. And next, and wise advice, as it's been said. And next we have Freya Robb.
How does that look? Is that?
Yeah, we can see it.
Brilliant. Okay, cool. Okay, so I am a press officer at Science Media Centre, and I will just talk briefly about what the SMC does, how we work with scientists, and sort of how we think the best ways of engaging with the news media are. So we are an independent press office. We have no sort of stance, and we're not trying to get our own name in the media. What we really want is to improve the accuracy of reporting, not the amount. So when controversial science hits the headlines, we're just trying to get the best experts in the field into the media fray, getting them interviews with journalists, getting their quotes in written pieces, getting them on broadcast interviews and everything. We work on sort of the messy, controversial, breaking news and scare story topics. So I think sort of the work you guys all work in probably ticks all of those boxes. So I hope this is sort of quite a relevant talk for you all. We have the sort of philosophy that we'll get the media to do science better when scientists do the media better. If we could design the media landscape from scratch tomorrow, it probably wouldn't look the way it does now, but that's not an option. So we really believe in supporting scientists and academics and researchers into fitting around how the media works and being able to support them to work to the sort of the slightly crazy deadlines that the media works to try and make sure they have the biggest impact they possibly can. So this is, I'm just going to share a couple of slides to highlight why we think the national news media is still really important. As some of the other speakers have said, obviously you should choose what sort of outlet you're most interested in and what you're trying to achieve from your engagement with the media. With national news media, it's about a really, really broad reach. It might be less targeted, but it's reaching sort of the mass public. This graph just sort of shows that even, sort of, I know there's a lot of interest in social media as well, but online, sort of that top line in sort of the dark blue, which includes social media, but also includes the traditional news outlets online, does seem to be one of the main ways people continue to get their news. So it's really important that people continue to engage with this, especially when you want to reach a broad audience. If that information that they're reading is correct, that's brilliant. If it's not, that's really, really potentially quite damaging and dangerous, especially on sensitive issues. So that's why we really encourage scientists, if they feel comfortable with it, to engage with the national news media, as well as all the other outlets. This is a really nice slide that I love showing to researchers. And so all of you probably fit into sort of the top, the sort of 8 categories. This was a survey done by Ipsos Mori, they do it every year. And they ask a bunch of people, do you trust people from this profession to tell the truth? And you can see at the top, nurses, doctors, engineers, teachers, judges, professors, scientists. And people really trust you to tell the truth. And I think with that comes a huge amount of responsibility. You could lose that if you don't use it wisely. If people lose faith that you're going to tell them the truth, that's quite a dangerous position to be in. And as you can see, journalists, government ministers and politicians are right down at the bottom. So it's actually a really, really privileged position to be in. And when the public hear you speak, they do think you're telling the truth. So I think it's really important that you recognise that and see it as a privileged position, and also treat that position very responsibly. Just to give a sort of overview of how we fit into everything, we're a very small team of 9 people, but we work with a huge database of experts and scientists from across academia and industry, covering most scientific disciplines. We have a particular focus on the controversial, messy ones that often end up in the media, but honestly, that probably encompasses most disciplines that there are. We also work with press officers at individual organisations, a lot to help find the best experts on a story and work with them on press briefings and everything. And then the last piece of that puzzle is obviously the journalists. So we've got very extensive press lists, and something I would always recommend when you're working with the news media is to try and work with the specialist journalists. They might be a science specialist, a health specialist, they might specialise particularly in sort of social affairs issues. If they know the area very, very well, they are much more likely to report it accurately. They will know the history, they will know how to read sort of papers better on your topic, they'll understand the lingo that you're using and everything. So I'd really recommend, if you are engaging, try and speak to the science and health specialists if you can. This is just a very, very quick slide to show sort of what the British news media landscape looks like. So we've got the news wires in the middle. These are known for writing up sort of articles and copy very, very quickly, and these get sent to all of the other outlets as well. So they help inform sort of what is the sort of developing narrative and media coverage. And so that's really, really beneficial because they have really far reach, not just within the UK, but much more widely globally as well. You've also got the tabloids, broadsheets, and broadcast media as well, and the Science Media Centre works with all of those. So we've got some main strategies, and I'm just going to go through all of them. This is what the SMC does, but I think they're applicable to sort of anyone thinking about media work at all in terms of useful strategies to help get your expertise across to the public. Journalist inquiries are very straightforward, what they say on the tin. Any journalist can get in touch with us and we will try and match them with the best, most relevant experts. So we'll go to our database and we'll ask to try and find the best person for them. It might be for an interview on TV or radio. It might be just a background chat about a subject they're really interested in writing and covering. They might want some advice on a new paper that they've read to see how important it is, and we'll try and match that up. I think something that's worth mentioning here is if you are approached and you're not quite the right person, something that's still really important you can do it's then help pass them on to the right person, because you're probably in a relevant-ish field, even if you're not quite the right person that they've approached, and you can still really help inform the coverage by helping that journalist find the right person to speak to, if you have time. If not, you can pass them on to your press office or the Science Media Centre. So rapid reactions, I think this is very relevant to sort of your area of research. It's responding to breaking news stories. And I think it's been mentioned previously, this is a really good sort of way in to talk about your expertise. So we are continually monitoring the news, and it'll probably be a breaking news story. It'll probably be a worrying, scary, difficult news topic. It might be quite controversial, but it's also a chance when, if it is the biggest story of the day, the journalists will be scrambling around trying to find people to either go on sort of the rolling news, to interview very quickly, and to try and get a gauge of what's going on. It could be a dam collapse, it could be the next policy and lockdown announcements for COVID. And I've got an example later on sort of more relevant to this around sort of a big issue involving sort of violence and potentially mental health. So this is your opportunity when actually in the day-to-day media news cycle, journalists might not be approaching you, they might not be thinking about your area of expertise. And while it could be seen as sort of a threat, it's also one of the best opportunities to start talking about your research. We've next got roundups, which is putting research into context. This is when we send new studies to relevant experts to try and get their thoughts and comments on the new research. We might ask them, is this a sort of really significant, important new topic, or is it in fact actually very well known, nothing novel? Is the sample size big enough to give conclusive results? Is it an RCT? Is it observational? To help journalists get a gauge of sort of what the study's saying. So even if it's not your work directly, you can help inform coverage of other people's work and your area of expertise and your discipline, so that the public has a better appreciation and understanding of new research coming out. Finally, we run media briefings. These can be background briefings, news briefings, emergency briefings, and expert encounters. This is a great opportunity where scientists can really sort of set the agenda. They can sort of highlight what they think is really important. It might be explaining their new paper that there's a lot of journalist interest and saves time rather than picking up the phone to 100 different journalists in a day and answering the same questions. It can also help shape the media narrative so that it fits more and is more aligned to the evidence rather than a narrative that might be growing with an absence of evidence there. It's also a really gorgeous way for scientists and journalists to meet regularly, improve that dialogue and relationship as well. I know I'm a bit over time, but it's quite hard to visualize what I'm talking about. So I'm trying to show you just sort of quite what a profound impact you can have. This, I'm sure everyone's aware of, was a really awful story. As soon as it hit, it was the only story in town. It was a plane crashed, and very, very quickly, people obviously are looking for causal reasons as to what happened, trying to work out what the motivation was and how this disaster could have come about. So very quickly, people were sort of suggesting that a previous diagnosis of depression in the pilot was the reason this had happened, and almost spiraled very, very quickly into, should people with a history of mental health conditions be allowed to be pilots, which you could see the narrative trying to put these pieces together and form a story. So we immediately went to our database and got some expert comments, and you can sort of see this is a really good way of starting to engage with the media, because you can work with us or your press office to put a written comment. We can look for any hostages to fortune, we can help you put your main points in, and it's obviously slightly less daunting than a big sort of live TV interview, but if we see it very quickly, we can really help inform the coverage. So there was coverage all over, but this is just some examples. AFP, the Newswire, ended up sending out a Q&A about depression, suicide, and sort of violent acts and sort of mass murder, suicide type things, which is basically a compilation of all of the comments that we sent out, and this was sent widely to all other media. So along with sort of some of the more sensational media, there was also this sort of background which actually spoke to the research and what we actually knew about this, with a lot of cautioning about making such strong claims. Again, BBC News did sort of coverage of this, but it was filled with expert comments that actually referred to the evidence that we had around this, and also cautioning against making claims on a case that actually no one had any idea about at that time. This is a really nice example. This article is almost a direct consequence of the work we did, and sort of helped filter through and just said these huge claims that were being made really don't stack up in terms of the evidence. We should not be doing a knee-jerk reaction, and it was the perfect opportunity to actually speak about research in your area when everyone is looking at it. So I just wanted to sort of show you a very short example of that. I'm so sorry I'm running over time, but this is sort of my last slide. What we think we need from scientists is honesty. Don't have a party line, speak to the evidence, admit uncertainty, change your position if the evidence changes. Don't be set on a message, be set on the evidence and trying to help the public understand that. Please be willing to do this. If a journalist calls you up, they really do want to hear from you. They're not trying to trip you up or anything. Make every story your business. Patience, you might have to repeat the same thing time and time and time again till you're blue in the face, but the message will eventually get through. We really, really do believe in that at the SMC, and we think it's really important. And just because you don't think the story is worth writing about, you think they're sort of got the wrong end of the stick, that won't stop them writing it. So if you don't speak to them, they'll find someone else. And if they don't speak to them, they'll find someone else. And eventually you might just end up with someone that fits what they want to say rather than what actually the evidence is saying. So I'd really encourage you, if you are the expert that they should be speaking to, please do pick up the phone and speak to them. But yes, I will end it there. Thank you.
Oh, brilliant, Freya. Really, thank you so much. And I feel so sorry I have to rush you all. I really don't mean to, but at least that gives us then enough time for also Q&A. But really, thank you so much for the input. And last not least, Kirsty Walker from UCL Media Relations.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great, lovely. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah, great. I'll just put it on a slideshow. So first of all, thank you very much to inviting me to speak today. As the introduction says, I'm Kirsty Walker. I'm Director of Media Relations at UCL. I'm also an ex-national newspaper journalist, so I've had over 20 years of being in the media, either on the front line as a reporter or working for PR agencies and more laterally for the Social Mobility Commission within Whitehall. So a few messages I'd like to really run through you today, and some of my colleagues have covered this already. But my first question is, why do media? And everyone, I'm so glad so many people on the call today. You're obviously clearly interested in interested in the media landscape and promoting your work. And I think it's worth just stopping and standing back and saying, why to you standing here, why is it important for you to do media? Well, it's important so you can raise your own personal profile, your department and institutional profile. Certainly, anecdotally, at least, we know that academics who have high profile in the media are more likely to be considered potentially for more high profile opportunities at the places that they work. And we talk a lot about impact in academia. I'm sure you're all familiar with and do a lot with REF, etc. But there's increasing focus. And although media is one route to impact, it's actually what follows that matters. So time with our academics at UCL, quite often what we'll find is we'll land a really strong, responsibly placed news story in national media or global media. And what that leads to is increased speaking opportunities, potential calls for evidence for government bodies, influencing policy. There's so many ways in which media can be a route to that impact. It's good for your relationships with funders and partners to show that your work is getting publicly recognised. And also, we do have a duty, I think, when our research is publicly funded, that we should be communicating it to wider audiences. And also the point that a lot of the speakers here have touched on, you are the experts, and you have a real role and responsibility for educating the public, enacting change through dialogue, and crucially in the areas that you're working in, debunking myths. And it's also by being proactive with media, it gives you the opportunity to control your narrative. So we've seen occasions where academics have had their research picked up off preprint websites that they had no knowledge of, the journalists were digging around in, and the next thing they found themselves in the media for the wrong reasons. And it can be really daunting. That's my other message. I know that even having dealt with media and been on TV myself, it's absolutely nerve-wracking. And my second message to you, if I get this slide to work, is that you have friends, which is the good news. And your friends are your university press teams. And some of you will already have had dealings with your press team, some won't, but just I thought it worth explaining who we are. So in every press office, you'll get a team of communications professionals, predominantly with media experience, and quite often who are manned by ex-journalists like me, and we're experts in our field, which is dealing with the media. And really there are two roles for the University Press Office, and that's to promote the university and brilliance of academic research through the media responsibly and carefully. And the other thing, of course, is to protect our universities, institutions, our department, faculties' reputations when things go wrong, and things do sometimes go wrong. And you really should pick up the phone. And if you're worried about the media, if you're worried about a call you've had, a request to do an interview, you've got your team of experts who are the ones that you should be leaning on for their advice and expertise. Obviously, we set the university's media strategy. And the other thing I'd like to underline is most universities will have, within those comms team, individuals who've got specific areas of expertise that will be really closely matched to what you do. We're also hopefully well connected, good contacts, both internally across the university. So if we're not the right place, we can probably direct you to the right place to get what you need, whether that be video content or podcasting or whatever, but also externally. While we obviously have clear, good, strong relationships with the journalists we deal with, we also tend to have quite strong relationships with stakeholders like funders or potentially hospitals or whoever, and brilliant people at the Science Media Centre and the Conversation. We're also handy to draw on out of hours. I'd like to stress in emergencies only because we also work quite hard and need a break at the weekends. But if you need us, you will have a Central University Press line that you should be able to call 24 hours if need be. Just a quick slide, just to give you an example. This is the UCL Media Relations team. As you'll see, we've got media relations managers that are married to each of the faculties with different areas of expertise, and we all have different roles. So my advice to you is go and find your university press team, find out who your dedicated contact is, and just drop them a line and get in touch. They really won't mind. They'll be thrilled to hear from you. And what do we do when we support? If you do make that call and say, I've got a piece of research coming up, I don't know what to do with this, it might be tricky, it might be controversial. Well, that's where we come in. So our role is to support you and work with you through that whole process and advise you on what's the best strategy for your release. And the first question we'll ask you is, who do you want to speak to? Who are your audiences? And it might be that actually you don't want to end up on the front page of the Daily Mail. What you'd like is a really carefully placed piece in a trade magazine, or potentially it might not even be a release. Actually, what you'd like is a podcast or something else, an op-ed, and in which case we'll drop a line to Stephen at the Conversation and get that process going. We'll help you research, so don't worry about the writing of press releases, we'll support you with that. And again, very important to stress that we will do it with you. It's very much a joint process, and we would never release anything without your say so. We'll also work very carefully and closely with your stakeholders, whether those are your partners, your funders, and their comms teams. We're very used to that. Media engagement, obviously we can field and we do. We'll take media calls. We'll take a judgment. Is this one you want to do? Is this in your best interest? Is this a good place to land your research? And we'll manage any, as I say, crisis comms, reactive issues. We also have the potential to arrange press conferences, briefings, filming and photography, and that's really important. So if you do have a piece of research that is particularly sensitive, the chances are we'll pick up the phone to Freya at the Science Media Centre and work very closely with the SMC to ensure that the message, your research lands carefully and well in the media as it can. Another thing just to know is media is just one outlet. What often happens is academics will land a piece in the media, and what that does is that actually drives content on other channels. Or as I've said, there might be other better ways to promote your work. It might just be that you want an internal piece in your internal staff newsletter to communicate your work to your colleagues, and that's fine too. The other thing that we do is monitor closely all the media mentions that come out from the university. We evaluate those, and the last point, which is really crucial, is most university press offices should organise media training, which is a much more in-depth session, which will give you those tips and tricks. And I'm just going to finish off quickly now. What are my tips and tricks for you? So first of all, audience, who are you talking to and why? That's the first question you need to ask yourself. Timing is everything. One of the biggest frustrations we have in our press team is an academic will pick up the phone and say, I've got my paper's being published in Nature later today. Can you do me a press release? In which case there's this mad scramble to get your content out. With more notice, with more timing, there's so much more potential for us to land your research and your stories in the right way. And I really would stress that. Come to us early, and even if you haven't quite yet finalised your research, just for us to know that it's on the horizon is really helpful. Ask yourself, what's your hook? The test I always use as an ex-journalist is, can you communicate your research to your mother, your friends? I think the BBC uses an intelligent 16-year-old. How would you describe your research? And that's really your elevator pitch. Is it interesting? Do people find it interesting? So think about that. Think about what the collateral you've got. So the story is one thing, but what video content do you have? Have you got any case studies you can use? Do you have any infographics? All of this helps drive content, is really useful for media. Images, they say a picture speaks 1,000 words. That's true. We had a big story last year with the design of the CPAP Ventura breathing aid, and we got some fantastic photography commissioned, which really helped drive its media coverage. And then my other tips are be available. So it's a highly competitive market in the media. Journalists are exceptionally busy, and there is how many hundred higher education institutions out there in the UK. If you don't answer the phone and if you're not available, they will ring somebody else. And if you're visible and you've got potentially a great social media profile, you've done media work before, you'll be somebody trusted that journalists want to come back to. My other tip would be realistic about what is media worthy. We sometimes get academics come to say, oh, I've got a great amount of funding for a grant. It's really not media worthy. Journalists tend to be interested in human stories, stories that will really relate to people and their lives and experiences. So ask yourself, this might be my research topic that I've been buried in for the last 2 years, but really, is it media worthy? I'd also actually just say, be brave. It is a bit daunting sometimes dealing with media, but with the right support and with the right tips, once you step out and put your toe in that water, you'll find that journalists will come back to you time and time again. And I think one of the panelists said, they're not trying to trip you up. Most of the journalist engagement is media wanting to know what your thoughts are. They're coming to you as the expert. That's that. And last one is just be nice. Be nice to press offices. That's my quick plea. But do be nice to journalists. If you're nice, available, accessible, then you will get booked and you'll be a success. So that's it from me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kirsty. And this is now the end of the approximately 5-minute input. So I would like to welcome all the speakers to switch on their videos and mute themselves for now. Basically, we're going into the Q&A session. So we already have some very exciting questions in the chat. So I invite basically all our speakers to briefly have a look at that. And I would like to go basically through them so the audience can get an answer to their pressing interest. So perhaps we start with Stephen. We had a couple of questions on the conversation. One of them was from Karen, where Karen is interested in knowing how to better connect, for example, with the conversation. And another one from an anonymous attendee about what is the best way to engage in the conversation, and how can researchers just propose topic, or are you approaching them? So if we start with that for now.
Thank you. Yeah, I think like all media outlets, the best way to initially engage with it, if you want to become a contributor, is to read it. So I would say sign up for the daily newsletter. I've stuck the link in the chat channel, and just read what we produce. That gives you a sense of what we produce out of the UK Bureau, which is about 15 articles a day or thereabouts. That gives you a sense of the spread of content, and then actually to move to the process of actually pitching. I'll just see if I can share my screen a moment.
Actually, Stephen, I didn't see that you posted something in the chat. I don't know if we missed that. And actually, there was another question, in addition to that, which is, do you need to have a PhD to basically write for the conversation?
You don't need to have a PhD. We want people to be active researchers at academic institutions or equivalent research institutes. So, you know, there's a bit of flexibility in that. But yeah, we want to know that people are actively researching the subject that they work in. Can you see that? I think I've got the...
Yes.
So, so if you look up in the center there, get newsletter, that takes you through to a link where you can sign up for, that's the UK edition newsletter. And to pitch, if you scroll down the homepage, there's a box on the right hand side that says pitch an idea. Click on tell us, and that will route those ideas through to the relevant editors. So yeah, it's, you know, I mean, I should be honest, we get lots and lots of pitches, you know, hundreds a day. We can't respond to everything. And I guess it would, just to echo some of the things that have been said already, particularly by Kirsty just now, you know, think about the relevance of your expertise. Think about how it fits into the news agenda. Think about the kind of things that we publish, and how that your idea might work with that news agenda, and you'll have a much better chance of engagement. And also, yeah, I think Kirsty said as well, content that works around people and personalities is always very grabby and likely to get the attention of one of the editors. The other thing I would say is it's a very collaborative process. So you might pitch something, and I would actually say it's probably quite unusual for an editor to come back and say, yeah, we'll take that. Generally what will happen is, that's a really good idea, but what if we did it a bit like this or a bit like that, and try and shape it in a certain way? So I would encourage you to be open-minded to that process. Sometimes we get inquiries that say, like, how can I get a piece in about you know, the process of the US election, and like, we kind of need a lot more than that. We need particular angles, and so that may be the starting point of a discussion, but you tend to find that the process kind of plays out, and where the content ends up might be somewhat different to what was pitched. Now, I should just add that shouldn't panic you, because the editorial system guarantees that you will have sign off on what is published. So we physically can't launch a piece until you, as the academic author, hit publish as well, or hit I agree to publish at the same time as we do as editors.
Leonie, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm muted. Do you hear me now? Yeah, okay, sorry. Another question from Catriona around, hi everyone. She wanted to ask, what advice would you have about getting sensitive topics into the news without getting it sensationalized? Anyone who would like to answer that?
I can potentially, but Freya might want to come in. I might dovetail to Freya. Yeah, so my strong advice would be to work with your university press office in the first instance. We're very used to dealing with quite a lot of potentially issues that could be misconstrued or land in a way that's picked up irresponsibly by the media. So I think it's really important to use the expertise of the university press teams. They will help you, they will guide you, and will know through their experience how things might land and might be interpreted in the media in the first instance. If there's something really controversial, the strategy is so important. This is how we might release the story to media, and rather than, it might be a case that we might not want to put something out on blanket release to mass media for fear. It might be actually a better strategy to land it in the first place really carefully as a pitch with one responsible specialist journalist, and if it lands well in the first instance, it tends to, not always, but it does tend to if you can land it well first time, that's really helpful. And then of course the other thing we'll do is would almost certainly, on a highly controversial issue, would be to pick up the phone to the SMC, and with the SMC organise a press briefing that I'll let Freya talk a bit more about how that would be handled, but something that's particularly high profile that has the potential to land in a way that you don't want it to land. There's many media strategies we can use. I won't go into them all here, but probably just hand over to Freya to talk a bit about the SMC.
Kirsty. I think Kirsty summed it up perfectly. If you know something's coming and it's very sensitive or controversial, you have to be proactive in thinking about how it's going to land before it hits the media. If it's already hit the media and it's not landed the way you want, it's going to be much harder to get more measured and accurate coverage than if you've had a really straight plan to set off with. That doesn't mean even with a plan it can't go a bit wrong. The media has always got risks with it. That's how it is. I would say, if you want to do media work and it's very controversial, it probably is because it's a very important topic and it means a lot to people and they really want to know the answers. So I think what the SMC would do, if it was a press briefing, we would sit you down in advance and think of all of the most difficult questions that the journalist might come up with and run them past you. And you can say, I'm really worried about getting this question. I don't know how to answer it. And we will work with you on what the answer is and how best to relay that. And so, yeah, if there's anything you're particularly concerned about, or we'd say, if we hear about your work and we say, right, would you be happy with this headline? And you say no, we'll work with you to try and avoid those headlines. You can't always avoid a difficult headline. And I think when it comes to violence and mental health, it is so much better than it used to be, but it's not perfect and people love to be scared. That's partly why the media sometimes exists. A big scare story, but even if the headline's not perfect, but you were in there with all the nuance and measured comments that you've given to the journalist, that is still a really big improvement from just a big scary headline. So I think really think in advance about why you want to talk about it. Is it sufficiently justified in terms of the quality of evidence to put the story into the public? Do you have enough confidence in the findings, even if they are worrying, that you're happy for the public to know about them, and you're not going to have to row back a little bit in a few weeks, say, actually, that wasn't quite what we found. So I think be confident in your findings and make sure they're pretty watertight. Always accept and be really open about uncertainties and things you don't know, especially when it's a big, scary story. It's fine to say you don't know to a journalist. Never try and answer a question if there isn't an answer. That's going to make you come unstuck later on. So yeah, I think speak to your university press office, speak to the SMC, and basically do as much in advance of this hitting the mainstream as possible. One of my examples is obviously once something does hit the mainstream that you're not aware of, like a breaking news story, get in there really early so the narrative is informed by the evidence as soon as possible. And I think that's really, really important when it comes to topics around mental health, domestic abuse and violence, because there are lots of maybe myths going around, there's a lot of assumptions, there's a lot of maybe slightly outdated views on it. And if you can help inform that from the beginning and help journalists know what's true and what the evidence tells us about that, doing it sooner rather than later is really important. So yeah, I think that's what I'd say.
Any comments from Mark?
Yeah, I've been waving. One of the things that I'd like to say is when you are dealing with a story that involves humanity and the earth, the people that you're talking about will also be part of the general public that you're talking to. And I think that's incredibly important with the topics we're talking about here. We're talking about violence, we're talking about mental health, we're talking about abuse. It's very easy to assume that you're talking to a general public who are not in any way concerned with or connected to the issue that you're talking about. And that has to shape the things that you say and the way that you present it, because there's not the good, normal, rational kind of enlightenment people meeting in their coffee house over here, and the silly, easily roused mob over there. You're talking about things that have a reality for people, and I think that often, not often, sometimes gets lost in communication of academic results. You forget that there were subjects of your research, you forget that there are outcomes from your research, you forget that your research may well have a direct impact upon, if not someone's day-to-day life, then how other people regard their day-to-day life. And that means kind of you have to do some galaxy brain thinking when you're thinking about your messaging, especially when there's an unfolding story. Like I remember I wrote a piece about the German Wings pilot at the time, and God, that was a feisty few days. Because sometimes, you know, talking about humanity in the face of facts can make you extremely unpopular, especially when the humanity you're talking for is a bit, you know, a bit of humanity that everyone else pigging hates. So I think that kind of responsibility and that kind of remembering that the things that you talk about don't just exist in your research is really, really important.
Can I also just say that I think also just bear in mind the outlet that you are dealing with, and be aware of their general tone and their general way of behavior and operations and so on. I mean, I know that in the main broadcast, BBC especially, that there is very strict guidelines about fairness and representation and not misleading, and essentially, you know, treating people on the level, you know, in layperson's terms. So you need to sort of be aware of who you're talking to, and any responsible organisation will have good practice guidelines, as it were, that they should be following. So bear that in mind, really. And also then within those, what is the particular programme or publication that you are addressing? Again, you know, this can inform the way that you might feel your outcome will turn out.
Brilliant, thank you. There was one question, Shiroma, you already answered, but I just want to briefly come back to about, and I see that in university myself, that like a lot of professors are invited to speak to the media. And the question is, how can actually early career researchers get their voice out, especially if you're part of a lab where there's like the professor and then you're just one of the working bees? Any tips here?
If you're asking me, I mean, I would say that it's still important to talk about your work, because you are integral to that. I mean, even if you're not the professor, as it were, you have personal experience, you have personal knowledge, you're quite entrenched in that, hopefully. So get out there and talk about it, as long as you have the permission, as it were, to do so, and use all the tools that are at your disposal. To do so. Obviously, the social media tools are the very obvious ones that come across. And then also follow people who are talking about these things in which are relevant to your realm, and the journalists who are talking about them. I think that would be, and perhaps even approach them if you have something interesting to say, because journalists also will take ideas from people, you know, ideas that they hadn't thought about, which might plug into what's happening, but from a different approach, from a different tangent, for instance. So there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, as long as you're real, as it were, you know, you're presenting authentic research and authentic work, and you are yourself, and you're talking about something that is absolutely true and verifiable. I personally would be always delighted to hear from people out there doing interesting things, because that's what makes our world go round.
Kirsty, I see you. Yeah.
Yeah, no, so I was going to say, I think we all know that universities can be hugely hierarchical places, but I'd actually say when it comes to dealing with the media, I think it's one place that isn't hierarchical, in the sense that a story is a good story to tell. And certainly we in our press team, we'll be delighted to hear from you at whatever level you are on your academic career. And I'm just thinking offhand, there's been cases that we've landed some really fantastic media coverage for PhD researchers. You don't have to be the top professor. And actually, one of the things I didn't mention that I'm sure some of your media teams will do, but we go out and actually proactively promote our experts, and we will want to find you, whoever you are, whatever your field. And also, it isn't necessarily just the big names. I mean, it's fair to say that sometimes the big names are the ones that journalists, if the BBC wants to speak to somebody, the chances are that they will probably ring you back again if they think you've got a prof in your title. But it's certainly, and actually if you're an ambitious young academic who's wanting to make your way to top, it's one of the really good ways of getting noticed as well. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, Freya.
So yeah, I've seen another sort of question slightly related to the SMC about this, and we're not the best organisation for very sort of more junior researchers, because our database is postdoc and above, but that doesn't mean we don't work with sort of early career researchers. And if we're running a press briefing and you have been a crucial part of the team and you've been doing a lot of the sort of hard work and really know the data and know the study really well, we would love to have you on the briefing panel, and we think it's important. And often you can explain it best because you're sort of really into sort of the detail of all the work and stuff. And actually, I do think a lot of the time when we see press releases come in, because we see press releases from all the funders, all the journals, all the universities, there has been sort of quite a shift in sort of even the last sort of few years. There is definitely more of an emphasis on sort of the collaboration side of things. It's not all done by the professors, you guys doing all of the hard work a lot of the time. So I do think there's been a move from it. And I do think if you want to do media work, just flag yourself up to the press team. And also if you know there's a big paper coming out in a journal and there's a chance of media work, just say you want to do some interviews. And I'm sure actually lots of professors would be very happy for you to do some of the media work. They're probably very happy to share it out because it might be sort of multiple ones in a day. You could start off doing some small radio stuff, or you could do some written comments back and forth with the journalist, and then sort of see how it goes. And if you really enjoy it, I think you might as well start sooner rather than later, so that you just get used to it. And yeah, I definitely recommend you trying to sort of see where you can start doing it.
I see Stephen has his hand up, but can I just, Freya, ask you, there's one question about the funding of could you address that from Karen?
So I typed an answer, but yeah, so we're a charity. We've got, I think, over 100 funders. Bar UKRI and Welcome, no one can give over 5% of our sort of annual income, to sort of show that sort of we're completely independent of what our funders want us to do. They give us money because they think we do a good job. We will work with you whether your organisation funds us or not. If we think it's important that we do the work on it, we will do it. If a funder asks us to do something, we'll only sort of, or mentions a paper coming up, we will look at it objectively and say whether we're going to work on it or not. It's not the easiest funding pitch, but luckily I don't have to do the funding pitches. But yeah, essentially you get nothing in return for your money directly, except that you think what we do is useful.
Perfect. Thank you. Stephen?
It was just to this question of early career researchers. Again, yeah, just to say the general public's a great leveler, and so much of our best read content comes from early career researchers deploying knowledge that they've gleaned as part of a PhD program. And often they may be very close to something quite specific and might have something to add that really no one else in the world can add on a particular subject. So don't be shy. And I think that, I can't remember who said, but someone mentioned pairing with more senior academics can be a way to sort of dip toes in the water and gain a bit of confidence. The other thing I would add is that the conversation runs training sessions for early career researchers in how to work with us, but also just more broadly on the kind of skills that are useful in terms of writing for a generalist audience as opposed to an academic audience. So yeah, I mean, I'd say I'd strongly encourage people to take part.
Perfect. Thank you. There was one question from Justin, and I think Mark, perhaps you want to address this. It's the question around like a person with lived experience of violence, abuse, and mental health. How can they actually write about these experiences and share them, for example, on the social media without, for example, being harmed in the long run as well?
Well, anyone can put anything they want on the internet at any time, basically. That's the wonder of social media. The challenge that we have when you're writing about your own experiences is you don't get to control how other people respond to them. And there's a lot to be said for putting things in the public domain. There's a lot to be said for explaining things. There's a lot to be said for adding your experiences to other flows of knowledge. I think this is there's a very, very strong argument for using social media as a person with lived experience of things to add a kind of commentary to the things that happen in other places. The challenge is that if someone's going to be a dick to a researcher about their research, they'll be a dick to you as well. There's not a way of winning safely writing about your lived experience or broadcasting or video blogging or podcasting and stuff like that. In terms of keeping yourself safe, I think the most important thing to bear in mind is once you put something into the public domain, you can't take it back. And you really need to think almost strategically about what you want to achieve by using your lived experience in a public space, and what you do and don't have to say to do that. And this is where we get a bit confused, because we talk about human interest stories. We talk a lot about, people connect with people's stories and stuff like that. There's an extent to which we can get either caught in stereotypes of writing the kinds of stories about our experience that we're used to reading, or we can be pitching to become a celebrity from our own misery. And that can be a difficult position as well. So kind of thinking really clearly about, it might feel like it's important for me to say these things today, but will it feel okay for me to look back on them in 2 years' time and know that other people know them? So you kind of do have to keep yourself safe. And, people online can be absolute cocks, like absolute bellends. And you often will find with lived experience that you're drawn into far larger and greater cultural, academic, political bun fights, vendettas, etc., etc. So you really need to think about, would you feel okay when you're lying in bed thinking about your day, that the things that you said and the things that you shared online, that a complete stranger knows them now? And that would be my advice. And also as well, you can use your lived experience to do other things apart from tell the story of your lived experience. That would be my advice. Don't know if that's in any way helpful, but it is heartfelt. Thank you.
We have 3 more questions. I would like to direct 2 of them to you, Shiroma, and the last one to the whole panel. The 2 that I think are more addressed to you, Shiroma, is number 1 is, as a young journalist, how can we better prepare ourselves if we were to go into news producing for science and academia? And the second one, I think, is with regards to the awareness of researchers that are not in established kind of universities or research institutes. How can the media, how can researchers in charities, etc., be picked up by the news outlets like BBC as well? You're muted.
Sorry, it's always a problem, me muffling myself. Okay, so in terms of if you're say in a charity, for instance, we are very interested in what charities have to say and what research and findings they come up with. I did a film about domestic abuse during lockdown, which actually I interviewed Leonie, and for this, we went to the main charities which were dealing with this, because of course they had the research, the knowledge, and of course that they also pointed us helpfully to people who would be prepared to talk to us, which we had to deal with in a very, very sensitive way, given the subject. So I would say that, you know, if you are attached to a charity, then please let us know. Please shout about it. We you know, okay, so you haven't done a PhD in a particular and a particular thesis in something, but nevertheless, your experience, say, in dealing with real human beings and everything that surrounds that, especially when you're finding trends and patterns in certain circumstances, obviously our current one being one, we're very, very interested. So please, you know, get in touch and tell us. I think, you know, the social media, for all that we've said about the negative sides, we also emphasize the positives, and it is a great direct line. So, you know, please just reach out and tell us about what you're doing, which could be really interesting to us.
And the second question was from Kevin. What about young journalists that are interested in, you know, communicating science and about academia in journalism? Have you any tips for them?
So if you already have a science background, I mean, I think that's a great way to get into journalism in a way, and sort of further yourself in journalism. Is that what was being asked? Sorry.
I believe the question is, if there are young journalists and they want to prepare themselves for doing science communication, how can they do that?
Okay, so science communication, I mean, I suppose in a way that's what this is partly all about, but I mean, science communication, again, you decide who you're pitching to, what kind of publication, what outlet within that publication or broadcaster. So very, very important to get your audience right, absolutely crucial. And just make it accessible, make it relevant, make it interesting, because science is extremely fascinating, and it's what we rely on. And the pandemic, if it's told us nothing else, it's told us the importance of this and how without it, frankly, we'd all be dead. So, you know, you can, in a way, utilize times like this to push yourself forward and put forward the importance of a subject which traditionally might have been considered dry and academic and only for very specialized people. So I would say use all the knowledge and all the tools that you have garnered during your time as a scientist or someone with a science background or understanding of science, to then approach everybody in that way and make it understandable and make it fun if you can as well, because people always respond to something being fun. But it doesn't mean that you have to be frothy. You can still be have a serious message, but be fun with it.
Perfect. So we have 10 minutes left, and I'd like to address the last question, plus asking you to comment on any final points you would make. I'd like to keep it rather short, so we stick to the 1/2 to end of it, like on that time. And the question is from Nicole, and it's basically, how can we ensure that our points as academics, as early career researchers, are coming across appropriately and are not misused? And again, the invitation to make any final comments as well. Can we go in the same order, like Stephen first?
Well, one way I would say to do that would be to write for the conversation. But I mean, I think that there's always that risk if you're gonna if you are engaging kind of more broadly with the press or broadcasters. There's just that risk with and it's not always done with an agenda. Sometimes it's done inadvertently, but it leads to that that very low trust percentage that Freya mentioned earlier on. So I would say, particularly to early career academics or those who are less experienced in this field, the conversation does offer a route to public engagement, media engagement that is pretty much as safe as it can be. Now, that could still lead to quotes being lifted or things being taken out of context, but then you will still have the full document that you can then point back to and say, you know, here was my case, my article in its entirety, whether that's on the conversation site or whether it's republished elsewhere. So, I would say that the risks of not engaging are far higher in terms of leading to misinformation and misunderstanding. I think that your subject areas are safeguarded much more by you taking that risk and stepping out there.
Thank you. Shiroma?
I would say also that, I mean, say with broadcasters and newspapers, of course, you wouldn't be able to see what you have, see the final outcome and give sign off and so on. It doesn't work that way. So therefore, it does mean that you have to decide about the trustworthiness of the platform, trustworthiness of the outlet and so on. And I think I'd be right in saying that certain outlets, certain broadcasters pride themselves very much on being honest and decent and doing right by people and not misleading. So the other thing though is to get to know the journalist, as it were, and get to know their way of doing and conducting interviews and so on. I mean, you have the right to ask about the context and perhaps say how, who else are you talking to? Give me an idea of the general sense of it, that sort of thing, so that you can be fairly sure that you're appropriate in being the person to give that comment. But as was also mentioned previously, I think it's also important not to pretend to know something, and if it's not your area of expertise, say so, because everybody will respect you for it.
Perfect. Thank you. Mark?
So my two things are, don't oversimplify your message, and don't let your colleagues oversimplify your message. The other thing is, bake in your understanding of how your work might be misused into every propagation of that work. If you know that a massive sexist or racist might misrepresent your work, make sure you reference the fact that massive racists and sexists shouldn't misrepresent your work. Have an understanding of how your research might land before you try to land it. And I think that's the most important thing. Bake that in so that it's not possible to misrepresent it. Might mean you don't get used, but better to be not used than misused. That's me.
Perfect. Thank you, Freya. Freya, you meet.
I think everyone said sort of basically what I'd want to say. Just a couple of points. If you are misrepresented, it may well not be intentional. They may not have an agenda. They may have just slightly misunderstood something, or a sub-editor may have changed their copy. And if you are ever unhappy with the way you've been misinterpreted, tell your press officer, tell us, and we can get in touch. The number of times someone says, oh my God, this isn't what I said, it's been really misrepresented. You just send an email to a journalist being like, I don't think this is quite what they said. And they're like, oh God, sorry, it's been tweaked slightly and changed the meaning. I'll update it now online. Like, it's often so easy to correct. If it's not, we can work with you and we can sort of set up a more formal complaint process. We rarely actually do that at the SMC. I think it's always important to also know that they're journalists and you're scientists. They're doing a particular job. You might not like the way they've covered your comments, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. So I think you always have to really take a step back, even if you're in sort of some mad rage, and just say, is anything wrong in their article? And if not, you might just have to accept that you're not very happy with it, and maybe have a think about how you can avoid that next time. If you've never worked with the journalist before, check what they've written about on your subject previously. If you don't really like it, you can get in touch with us and just say, is this a journalist I should treat with caution? As I said earlier, work with the science and health specialists. They're absolutely brilliant. They're amazing. And they will not try and trip you up or misinterpret you. But if there is a journalist that maybe is slightly more handle with care, do it over written email, written comments if you want, so you can't sort of get tripped up over your words on the phone. Slightly on the flip side, if you're doing a broadcast interview, it's much harder to edit your comments if it's live, whereas pre-record, they can take snippets and use it in certain ways. So there's always things to think about in terms of the way you're doing an interview and the way it can sort of be used. So always something to be aware of. Your press office in the SMC is always able to give advice if you've been approached by a journalist and you're worried, and we can sort of do some digging or reassure you, or just say, this is what I would do if I were you. But yeah, I think Stephen's point was probably the best. The risk of your area of expertise being misinterpreted is probably higher if you refuse to talk to them than if you talk to them and try your best. It might not always go well 100% of the time, but I would really encourage you, even if you've had a poor experience with the media, to try it again and see what went wrong and see if you can avoid that happening, and we're always happy to advise.
Perfect. Thank you. Kirsty.
Yeah, so I would say you can control, there is an extent to which you can control your own narrative. So when you get that phone call saying, can you come and talk to us about X, give yourself a minute. You don't have to agree to that interview right there on the spot, although it will feel like it. Just say, I'm in the middle of something, I'll ring you back in 1 minute. Just take a few moments to say, why me? Why am I being asked? What are they wanting from me? And then to assess whether it's something you want to do. And again, as Freya says, you can pick up the phone to University Press Office and they'll help you assess whether that's an opportunity. There's ways of controlling in terms of you can give a written response. So that would be potentially a short paragraph. That the journalist, it's very much harder to take your comments out of context when they're written down. So that would be my other thing. And you also have control in broadcast interviews. So the tip we would give is write down your 3 key messages. What is it you want to say? Make sure you spend the time to do that before you go into an interview. And whichever path the journalist tries to take you off on, you bring back, it's your interview, you're in control to your 3 key messages. And then the other thing I would say is you know, we have academics that say, I don't like the Daily Mail, I don't like what it says, so I don't want to speak to them. Just really to underline the point that Stephen and Freya have made. Actually, you need to engage with those critical media outlets as much as you do the friendly ones, because they will still carry that other side, and your expert opinion. And actually, the audiences you want to move opinion on aren't the ones who already agree with you. They're the ones that potentially don't agree with you or aren't educated in the area that you're wanting to raise your points. And let's face it, as much as we collectively, you might hate the Daily Mail and Mail Online, it's one of the biggest global media reached outlets in the world with over 100 million unique users a day, I think, in the States. Certainly last time I looked, and it's driving content not just across traditional forms of media, but of course social media as well. So it's really important you engage with hostile media as well, but in a way that's careful and as controlled as you can make it.
Perfect. Well, we're literally out of time. We have 1 minute left. I'm really delighted that we managed to stick to the time frame. I'd like now to officially end today's first Early Career Researcher Lunchtime seminar series, which focused on media engagement. I hope everyone can join me in digitally applauding our wonderful speakers. Really, thank you so much for giving up your time and sharing all the information. I'm sure many of you can still get in touch with you on Twitter and other outlets. So if you're interested and want to learn more about their work, check out their background on social media or on the website. And if you're interested in the work that we as the Violence Against Mental Health Network are doing, please join us on our newsletter and hopefully we shall see you on the 17th of March, which will be the next Lunchtime seminar series, which will focus on policy engagement. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful afternoon. And again, thank you to all the speakers for the wonderful inputs that they provided.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.